What's up everyone, welcome to another Screen Notes video. Today we're going to be talking about Mr. Sleep, which is a horror movie about a serial killer who hunts down insomniacs so that he can eat their brains. I found out about this movie from a post on a Facebook group called Netflix, Hulu, Shudder, and Tubi Horror Lovers. Mr. Sleep is a low-budget horror movie that came out this year, and it's got a lot of negative reviews. Fortunately for us, that means there are a lot of details we can nitpick, so buckle up because this is going to be a bumpy ride. The opening shot is this POV tracking shot that walks up to the house, but you can tell that it was sped up in post-production for some reason. Then inside we see a bunch of random objects and a TV showing news coverage of the execution of the serial killer Mr. Sleep. Upstairs we meet the main character Felicia, who's a gamer. She's playing a video game, but there's lots of weird stuff going on in the edit here. For one, it sounds like multiple audio clips stitched together because the way she's talking and reacting is just not natural.
I'm going to get shot. No, don't get me over here. Getting into, guys.
And it's not in sync with anything being shown on the game. It's only this one clip from a game, and in this one shot, it's slowed down for just no reason. Next, you can see the soft edge on this door here is where they edited in a clip of her playing video games behind the door. Also, just an inconsistency, but the door is clearly more open in this shot than in the previous shot. We get the first scare when Felicia's hand gets grabbed by this monster hand, and it's actually not a bad scare, but I couldn't really understand why she put her hand on the door like this. It looked like she was just trying to close it, but you would never grab the door like this if you're trying to close it, unless you were waiting for a monster's hand to grab you. Then we hear a monster growl behind the door, and that's it for the intro. Another note is that this film fades to black a lot, which I think is a transition that's gone out of fashion, so it feels a little bit weird to watch. The movie would feel a lot better if they just cut to black more often. The opening credits are really long and they show you close-ups of newspapers and maps. I got pretty bored when watching this part. So Felicia lives in this fancy house with a front gate, and this is funny when you consider that later in the film people just pull up in the driveway. I guess all of the main characters just happen to know the gate code. Throughout the film we're shown the day of the week, and I guess this gives you a sense of the timing, but it ended up being hard to keep track of. And I actually didn't really care about what day it was because it didn't seem important to the actual plot. Felicia listens to this podcast called Murder in the Dark, which is supposed to be an underground true crime podcast. Then we meet Felicia's dad, Judge Payne. She basically tells him to go away, and then they hint at her being agoraphobic, so she doesn't leave the house at all. At the prison morgue, they have Mr. Sleep's body on a table, and this doctor starts making fun of Mr. Sleep.
You're one ugly piece of shit.
Before doing some paperwork and listening to some generic rock music. Mr. Sleep gets up and chokes him out. There's a montage of Felicia bumming around her room all day, but the lighting coming in through the window never changes angles like it would if the sun were moving, so it's pretty clear that these shots were all taken over the course of like 10 minutes. We get a look at their house, and I noticed that they have what's basically a parking lot in front. Even looks like they have lines painted on the asphalt. So my theory is that in real life, this is just a house that was converted into a space for commercial use, so it was easy to rent out for shooting this film. Then this dude Glenn rolls up to the house with a package, and the package isn't from him, so my guess is that he's a delivery guy, but he doesn't wear a uniform or anything, so I'm a little bit lost on what Glenn's job is. But Felicia does know him from high school, so they have a chat, and we see that Felicia wears some indoor Crocs. Glenn is pretty clearly a love interest. He's also used for revealing backstory, like here he brings up the fact that Felicia's dad is a now retired judge.
Thank you, Glenn.
Back at the prison morgue, this doctor is being held down by some very thin tape, which I'm thinking would be pretty easy to bust out of if you had the mind to. He doesn't though, and Mr. Sleep removes his scalp. This is actually one of the more gruesome kills in the movie, which makes sense because they'd want to front load all of the good stuff. Still though, they don't actually show that much. Here's where we learn that Felicia also has insomnia. So not only does she not leave the house at all, but she also doesn't sleep. So basically her life sucks. In the package is this sleeping mask and some goo that's supposed to help her sleep. Worthy of note, there's this water bottle here on her desk that's taking up a lot of the shot, even though it's totally unimportant. Also, she happens to have what looks like an ice cold glass of water on her desk, which doesn't really make sense for her to have in addition to this jumbo water bottle. Mr. Sleep gets out of prison somehow, and he finds this warehouse where he can get his costume together. Then the owner shows up, and he's this very meek and shy cowboy guy.
I can make you a great deal on that That coat, buddy.
And it's pretty clear that he's going to become the next victim. Now we're introduced to Felicia's insomnia therapy group that meets over Zoom and is led by this very serious looking woman, Dr. Chalice. The doctor is really off-putting. I'm not sure that's intentional, but I don't think I would continue to see her if she were my doctor.
Okay, that's enough, please. Let's try and remember everyone's feelings.
This Zoom call is mostly for comic relief. There's this girl Kingsley that's a huge bitch for no reason.
What I need is something that will knock me the hell out, not bore me to sleep.
And then they slip in a sex joke.
I can tell you it's not the worst stuff I've ever swallowed.
Meanwhile, Mr. Sleep has used some fishing line to string up the guy with the cowboy hat from earlier. And also I think somebody smeared some ketchup on his shirt. This kill doesn't really make much sense to me. He put some hooks through the guy's skin to hang him up with fishing line, and while that would definitely hurt, I don't see how that actually accomplishes killing the guy. Oh, then this woman comes in and she sees the whole thing and she screams. And I give that scream a 6 out of 10. It's not bad initially, and I like her facial expression, but they do this weird thing where they replay the scream over itself partway through. Felicia has sort of a strained relationship with her dad.
How was Groot?
In this scene, he asks her to watch a movie with him and she says no. He mentions that this movie Applewood has finally come out, and Applewood is a real movie made by the same director, so that's a little self-promotion here. Then Felicia talks with her friend Ellen over FaceTime, and they split the screen to show the shot of her face and the shot of her phone on the same screen, but you'll notice that the main shot doesn't actually match what her face is doing on the FaceTime preview. Unable to sleep, Felicia turns on the Murder Podcast, where they play an old interview with Mr. Sleep. Coincidentally, it's Felicia's doctor, Dr. Chalice, who's the one who conducted the interview with Mr. Sleep. We learn that Mr. Sleep has insomnia and that he likes to taste the memories of certain victims, which is a funny way of saying that he eats people's brains. Dr. Chalice then gets interviewed by a detective who asks how her private recordings got leaked. She basically says she doesn't know, and then the detective reveals that somebody else has been killed, and the way that the person was killed means it may have been Mr. Sleep. Glenn shows up with a sandwich for Felicia, and they have lunch sitting in the doorway. Felicia talks about how she likes meat, and Glenn calls her crazy on accident, which totally offends her.
Chicken, ham, steak, the rarer the better.
Guess you really are crazy, huh?
They move the romance along a little further, and they have this moment where they hold hands, and it feels very awkward. They have another group therapy Zoom call, and one of the girls doesn't show up because she's been killed by Mr. Sleep. There is this moment where it gets kind of dark. This guy Dexter is so tired all the time that he wishes he were dead. In this moment, it felt like the film got a little bit more serious about this insomnia theme, but that's only for a brief moment, then it goes back to the serial killer thing. Meanwhile, Mr. Sleep rolls up in his brand new pickup truck. I know that he stole it from this cowboy guy he killed earlier, but this truck looks like it's fresh off the assembly line. Also, I would think that somebody might be looking for this truck, given that its owner showed up dead. Anyways, Mr. Sleep hangs out in the bushes and watches Glenn continue to put the moves on Felicia. Okay, then Felicia's telling Glenn about what she's got going on in her life, and Glenn becomes super rude for no reason.
Pretty good, I gotta say. And well,
You know you can stop, right?
So that scene's kind of weird. It feels like Glenn at this point has failed the romance check, but I guess he's got so much riz that it just doesn't matter.
is this real?
I think it is.
One other thing is that he tells her that he lost his scholarship in college and that's why he had to drop out. Okay, I was also bothered by this really cringy line after Felicia asks him to come over for coffee later.
What kind of woman do you take me for?
I'm not sure yet.
And they're not even done yet. Glenn says he's gotta go, presumably for some kind of work emergency or something. But then he goes to his car and gets this camera so that he can come up and take a picture of Felicia, because he's trying to get into photography, I guess. Meanwhile, Mr. Sleep kills Dexter from the therapy group. The kill is pretty low effort. It's just Mr. Sleep hunched over this guy with a knife, and then there's a splatter of blood and some killing sounds. So Glenn comes over and they drink some coffee. The drinking sounds are a little bit too audible for my taste. Then it's kind of clear that Judge Payne doesn't approve of Glenn when he hesitates to shake Glenn's hand. Also, Glenn drops this line.
I'm full as a tick, but
I've never heard somebody say full as a tick before, but it's actually kind of funny. The detective visits Dr. Chalice again, and he points out that the killer is definitely targeting Dr. Chalice's patients. This makes her look very suspicious. I think the detective is one of my favorite characters so far because he's just a guy doing his job. I do notice though that he does this thing where he goes a lot. Felicia's texting her friend Ellen, and the keyboard on her phone is making noises like she's dialing a phone, which is confusing. Felicia then calls Dr. Chalice, who ignores the call. Here's where things start to get a little bit confusing. Chalice calls an unknown person, and we only hear her side of the conversation, where she says some pretty incriminating stuff.
If this gets out, we are both ruined.
Then the doctor calls Felicia back and says, hey, I'll come to your house and we can talk. After that, there's this scene where they try to force some suspense out of nowhere. Felicia hears a noise in her house during the daytime, which is not a very weird thing, especially when you don't live alone. But she must hear that spooky swelling music in the background because she starts to walk around the house like she's in a horror movie. And then she ends up going down the stairs like this, which was pretty funny. Then we hear an animal growl, which is sometimes in the background in this film, not sure why, but it turns out to be a fake out because her dad just walks up behind her.
What's up?
Hey, a quick interruption. If you're enjoying the video, you should consider subscribing to my channel. Subscriptions help support the channel so I can keep making videos like this one, so I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Dr. Chalice and the detective go to the morgue, which, based on the background, was shot at the same location as the prison morgue from earlier. They show that Mr. Sleep is tattooing his victims. Then Dr. Chalice casually drops some knowledge on Nordic blood sacrifice rituals.
It looks like a blood.
A what?
It's a Norse blood sacrifice ritual.
There is some obvious dubbing going on in this scene, by the way. You can tell how her voice changes in some of these cuts where she's not pictured.
Something new. I think he's become a super predator. Sacrifice ritual. He's linking himself to Viking berserker mythology.
And they also let us know that Mr. Sleep specifically removes the hippocampus, which explains why he says he likes to taste memories. Then a cop rolls up to Judge Payne's house, and they got him watching the house. He identifies himself as Unit A24, which I assume is referencing the film distribution company. I thought this was funny. I saw a Letterboxd review that said, OMG, even a cop that responds to a radio call for Unit A24, and all that made cringe and get a little nauseous. Judge Payne is fiddling with some berries when Dr. Chalice shows up. I guess she must know the code to the front gate. So this conversation is a vehicle for delivering a bunch of reveals, but honestly it doesn't make a ton of sense when you watch it and requires you to put a lot of pieces together on your own. So let me explain real quick. Judge Payne was the judge who ordered Mr. Sleep to be executed, but before the execution he gave Dr. Chalice access to Mr. Sleep for research purposes. She took a bunch of samples from his brain to help with her research in curing insomnia, and that serum that Felicia and all the other insomnia patients drank earlier was made using pieces of Mr. Sleep's brain. Gross. But she didn't want them to execute Mr. Sleep because she needed more living brain tissue for her research. So she tampered with the execution, and that's why Sleep is still alive. That's right, Sleep is back, baby, and he's mad that you took pieces of his brain, so he's hunting down all the people who drank the serum, and he's eating their brains so that he could get his memories back. Actually, this plot isn't so bad. I feel like it's got some good bones, but I didn't really get it the first time that I watched. Anyways, Judge Payne tells Chalice to buzz off. And this part I got a kick out of. Look at Felicia struggling to put this one AirPod back in the case. Felicia and her dad get into an argument because he doesn't approve of Glenn. Apparently Glenn does not come from a good family and he thinks that his daughter can do better. But really? I don't know, look at how dreamy Glenn is. Now Felicia's friend Ellen gets killed by Mr. Sleep, and this kill scene has no blood or anything, and it's just kind of a jump scare. There's a fake out where we're supposed to think that Sleep is behind this towel when he's not. but then it turns out that he's behind this other towel. And side note, Ellen seems to be the only person I know of in 2024 who hang dries their clothes outside. So the last thing we see from this creepy podcaster is this quick scene where they sign off and say they need to lay low. And there's this effect that's being used to obscure their face, but at one point you can see like an eyeball and some big glasses, which I'm pretty sure is just Dr. Chalice on the Zoom call from earlier. And I don't know if that's supposed to be an intentional reveal or not. From what I can tell, all of these podcaster shots were just the same shot of the actress who plays Dr. Chalice sitting there reading the lines. Whether or not it was intended that Dr. Chalice is actually the podcaster is really a mystery to me. Glenn comes over to watch a movie and he gives her this photo. Then they almost make out. Then they actually do make out.
Felicia.
Don't want to hear it.
They show Mr. Sleep eating a piece of brain and then do an associative cut to Officer 824 eating a taco. The cops keep scratching their heads trying to figure out this whole Mr. Sleep thing. In keeping with the theme of people overreacting to simple noises, Judge Payne hears a jingling noise and responds by whipping out the 9mm. It's another fake out though. The detective has shown up. I guess this detective doesn't really say anything about the fact that Judge Payne is waving his gun around. And I also suppose that the detective knows the gate code and that's how he was able to get in here. Oh, Mr. Sleep is around as well. Then there's this moment where Judge Payne realizes that the front door is open and freaks out because he definitely left it closed. Turns out that Mr. Sleep visited the inside of the house and left them a little message. For one, I thought that this shot of the two cops leaning on this car was decent. Oh, then we get this line.
Careful. I want you to choke to death.
Well, looks like that guy's being choked to death later. Now, it's time for another kill scene. And this one is bizarre. So remember this girl Kingsley from the Insomnia therapy group sessions? She was the one who was a huge bitch for no reason. So she's listening to this generic ass EDM song, which is just like a track that's played over the final edit. It doesn't seem like they did any work to make it seem like the music was playing in the room that she's in. So she's making sure that all of her hairbrushes and stuff are aligned just so, because I guess that's a character trait of hers. She's also wearing 3 top layers from what I can see, and that's kind of a weird look to me, but maybe I don't understand the latest fashion. Then there's also this hairdryer mounted to the wall, which is kind of a dead giveaway that this is a hotel room, right? Even though the establishing shot was a shot of a house. Anyway, she sips on some of this brain sleep juice, and then gets faked out that there's something behind the shower curtain. Then, uh-oh, Mr. Sleep grabs her out of a dark corner. Kingsley's mom is also on speakerphone for this scene, as per this shot that is definitely a still that they edited to make it look like it wasn't a still, but we can tell. Then Mr. Sleep takes out a dull knife and Kingsley screams. And that scream is like a 2 out of 10. You can hear her voice right before the scream, and based on the difference from her voice to the scream, it's either not her screaming or they recorded this at a completely different time. And you also don't get to see her face when she screams. Now Mr. Sleep wants to really start racking up the kill count, so he goes to Judge Payne's house and he pulls his really nice truck up behind Unit 824 Taco Cop. Taco Cop looks around for a little bit and then gets choked out through his car window.
Careful. I want you to choke to death.
Now we get a big confrontation between Glenn and Judge Payne. Turns out that in college, Glenn went to jail for reckless driving and involuntary manslaughter.
It was an accident.
Of course it was.
And that's the real reason that he left college and why the judge does not approve. So, the judge tries to blackmail Glenn into leaving Felicia alone, but Glenn just tells her about the manslaughter and she's like so okay with it. Meanwhile, Judge Payne gets his ass beat on the driveway by Mr. Sleep. Not so tough now, are ya, old man? Then Dr. Chalice calls up Felicia, and we get to see Felicia's horribly mistreated iPhone. So on the phone, Dr. Chalice says, "Hey, you're in danger, keep your dad's gun handy." Then she pulls up, parks, and enters the house in what feels like 2 seconds after hanging up the phone. And by the way, you can see through this little window that it's definitely daytime when they shot this. So she starts waving a gun around and explaining that Mr. Sleep is coming to kill them. Right on cue, Sleep shows up behind her, and then like total jerks, Glenn and Felicia run away and leave the doctor hanging out to dry. This part was actually kind of cool. Sleep grabs the doc's hand and then chops it off. Then Glenn breaks the leg off this chair and starts kicking the shit out of Mr. Sleep. And it's funny that Sleep is supposed to be like the most dangerous killer in the world, but then he's getting slapped around by some random ass dude who's like a part-time delivery driver. So Sleep gets only like one hit in, and then Glenn gets a little overzealous and Sleep grabs his arm, breaks it, and then elbows him in the head. Now for some reason, Mr. Sleep disappears here. I don't know if this is meant to imply that he's like only in your head or if he just dipped around the corner to use a med pack or something. But he gives Glenn enough time to deliver this dramatic speech before he dies.
I'm tired.
So Sleep eventually comes back to finish the job, but Felicia jumps on him and starts going apeshit. Then she runs outside and gets all dizzy because of the agoraphobia. Not sure if that's how agoraphobia works, but hey, the movie's almost over. Mr. Sleep pins her to the ground and tries to stab her, but she just catches his hand like it's nothing. Remember when Mr. Sleep was this absolutely massive dude and then they told us that he had almost like superhuman strength? Well, this young lady has no problem stopping his downward stabbing knife, so how strong could he really be? Then she snaps the handle of this rake like it's a pool cue in a bar fight, and she stabs him through the throat with it. Gonna be honest, around this time I was expecting some big reveal for the ending, but then there was really no reveal, which was kind of disappointing. Then the cops show up, and Felicia and Chalice are the only two who survive. There's also a post-credit scene that's a continuation of the Mr. Sleep interview, where he says that he always comes back. Anyways, that's all for this one. I hope you enjoyed the rundown on Mr. Sleep. Check out my channel for more content like this, and thanks for watching.
You had no right!
Felicia!
Bye, Felicia.